Hello everyone, welcome back to the second part of chapter 21. What we're going to be doing today is focusing mostly on how we regulate blood pressure throughout the body. Last class, as we drew this process out, let me kind of turn us back to this diagram here. This kind of helps us iterate the importance of why we want to regulate blood pressure, because I was telling you guys that if the capillary hydrostatic pressures here become too great, let's say this goes up over 35, then you're going to favor more filtration and less reabsorption is going to occur, and this interstitial fluid here will start to accumulate and you will start to have edema or swelling. So that was an important thing to kind of understand and grasp, that it is important to regulate blood pressure. Now, this just kind of iterates that and emphasizes that fact a little bit extra. So I hope you drew this out with me. If you haven't, please do, making sure that you can do this, because these are the things I'm going to be testing you on and discuss. So what I want to do now is look at how we control blood pressure. Now, we're going to start off by two different mechanisms that can do that. Local autoregulation, this is a type of intrinsic control. So these cause immediate adjustments. This is basically the heart controlling the heart. Neural mechanisms use neurons. Now let's kind of just give ourselves a little bit of information here and discuss that a little bit here. So what happens here is we have our medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata is the center that receives some information. Now, in your carotid arteries, in your aorta, and these kinds of places, the arch of the aorta, these kinds of places, you have something here called neurons. You have neurons, and these neurons are going to send information to medulla oblongata telling it, so neurons are going to tell it to fire, and the medulla oblongata is going to send information out using cranial nerves, for example, and using the autonomic nervous system components to go to the heart, and that will either increase or decrease the heart rate, and that also will equal an increase or a decrease in your blood pressure. Okay, so basically this is the overall thing. You're also the wall of the atria, things like that. They will have some communications here to tell this body to affect heart rate, which will affect the blood pressure. Okay? Basically, this is what we're looking at. So there are two types of neural mechanisms using the cardiovascular control systems in the medulla oblongata, and that should say control system, not controls centers, but control centers. And what that is it's going to increase and decrease cardiac output. It's going to affect heart rate and stroke volume, basically with two visceral reflexes that set it off. And I'm always trying to kind of find minor little typos I need to fix. One of those is the baroreceptor reflexes. They monitor stretching. Now, where do we find them? And let's kind of explain this a little bit. These guys monitor stretching of blood vessels. They're in what's called the carotid sinus. They're at the carotid artery, in the aorta, and the wall of the right atrium. Now, what do? They monitor stretching. Now, let's just say that and I'm going to kind of explain how this works a little bit. This is more in detail, but let's just say I have a wall of a blood vessel here, and this is a blood vessel wall. And inside this blood vessel wall, there's a set of neurons here, stretch receptors. I'm going to draw them like little coils. Now, attached to that is an axon that's going to be going to our brain. Okay, so let's say this is CNS right here. Now, if this blood pressure were to go up, if we had an increase in BP, increase in blood pressure, you're going to take these coils here, and what you're going to do, if I were to zoom in on them a little bit here, you're going to take these coils and you're going to pull them apart. Okay? They're going to get pulled apart and stretched, which is going to actually increase the amount of action potentials that neuron sends to the CNS. And vice versa. If you were to do the opposite, if you were to decrease the blood pressure, these coils would come together and that would decrease the amount of action potentials. So basically what you have is this thing here is a baroreceptor. And when they are stretched, when they are distended and distorted, they're types of mechanoceptors that are stimulated. When they increase the rate of stimulation, so an increase in blood pressure will increase the stimulation of the baroreceptor. The baroreceptors then will have increased action potentials, and that will tell the CNS there's been an increase in blood pressure. This is how it knows. Basically what you have here, this is something I talk about in AMP1, that there is an increase in receptor potential, and that this increased receptor potential increases action potential numbers. So here, if there's more action potentials more frequently, we know that this is going on. Now, what's really fascinating about this is if you constantly keep this, it becomes your new normal. Your body will now see this as the new normal, and it can become a problem if this stays for days and days. You might see this as the new normal because they actually adapt eventually, like how temperature receptors adapt. They have an adaptility. Okay. So that's something I talk about in AMP1 is receptor potential. An increase in receptor potential always results in increase in action potential on the sensory neuron. Okay? And hopefully now I know you guys probably never saw that. A lot of people are saying, yeah, my AMP1 instructor doesn't go into as much detail. Now, so that's just basically how it works. What I want you to understand is that if blood pressure goes up, an increase in blood pressure, these increases the blood pressure increases, the receptors ultimately decrease the cardiac output. So what is their goal? So our brain here has said, I have now caught this increased blood pressure. So blood pressure has gone up, stimulus. Our control centers perceive that. Now we're going to go to the heart and decrease the cardiac output. This is a negative feedback. Okay, negative feedback mechanism. Okay, so what we're going to do is use this extra stretching of the aorta, carotid arteries, atrial wall. When it stretches, and think of it as pulling apart a coil or a spring and stretching it, it acts to stimulate it. Kind of think of it like that. And we're going to use the parasympathetic to lower the cardiac output. We're going to actually go into the SA node, AV node, all that, and reduce the heart rate and reduce the stroke volume. Okay, that is our main goal here on this process. Okay, so if what we're doing is, if blood pressure actually goes up, we'll use the vagus. So this cranial nerve that we're using is the vagus. Okay, the vagus nerve. So parasympathetic cranial nerve number 10 will help reduce cardiac output by reducing your heart rate and your stroke volume. Okay? Now, one of the things it does is it vasodilates as well. So if you can make your blood vessels open up. If blood pressure goes down, that means we want to increase the cardiac output, make the sympathetic nervous system increase your cardiac output, increase heart rate, increase stroke volume, and also vasoconstrict. Now, the other big thing that we need to understand is the KemaSceptre reflex. Now, KemaSceptre reflex, I need to remind you guys of a few things in case your A&P1 instructors did not teach this. So I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a recap. In A&P1, Chapter 3, we learned that if you take C6, H12O6, and 6 oxygens, and combine those in the mitochondria of the cell, that we will produce 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters, and about 36 to 38 molecules of ATP. And you guys would have called this cellular respiration or aerobic metabolism. Okay, so if you did not know that, then we need to have an understanding that our body consumes oxygen and produces CO2. Now, what also is something that happens is that CO2 will chemically react with water in the body, and what it will do is it produces in this reversible reaction H2CO3, and that breaks apart into H plus HCO3 minus, called bicarbonate ion. Okay, now you do not need to memorize this equation yet, but here's what now I want you to start memorizing. Okay, so this is a review recap, something I've talked about in A&P1. This is not, my A&P1s didn't have to memorize it, but I did it on the board. My A&P1s had to memorize this equation, and I was relating this to it. Some of my students write it down, but I tell them you need to memorize this. So what we're going to see is anytime you increase carbon dioxide levels, now remember, these double lines mean this reaction is reversible. Something I teach, this is a dynamic equilibrium. Anytime you add something to one side of an equilibrium, you shove that reaction towards the other way. And what happens, if you ever increase carbon dioxide in the body, this will mean you increase hydrogen ions in the body. Okay? Now, let's remind ourselves that if we increase hydrogen ions, that anything that does this is an acid. And an acid is anything whose pH is less than 7. Okay? So, if CO2 goes up and we increase hydrogen ions, this means we decrease the pH of a solution, or to say we increase its acidity. Okay, now, if CO2 goes up, you must also note that oxygen must go down. So with these two equations, this helps us understand something here very big. Now, something from this will be on the test. This is an exam question right here, okay? Will come from this right here. And I want you guys to write this down repeatedly till you know it. This is something, so you guys agree, you can't understand this without understanding this. You have to understand that when I increase CO2, well, that means I'm consuming oxygen. I'm rearranging oxygen and glucose into carbon dioxide and water to make energy in the form of ATP. So, if CO2 goes up, hydrogen ions go up, pH goes down because an acid is less than 7. And that is an increase in acidity. Low pHs mean acidity because an acid has a low pH, but oxygen is being consumed. Okay? Right here, there is a question near the end of the exam on this concept, okay? And I want you guys to make sure you understand it. Is that with CO2 goes up, hydrogen ions always go up, pH goes down, blood becomes more acidic, and oxygen levels go down, okay? These things are all going to happen anytime CO2s go up, okay? So what is this meaning for me? Well, the KemaSceptre reflex is responding to CO2 and O2 and the pH of blood. So when CO2 goes up, the pH of blood goes down. Acidity goes up and oxygens decrease. So what happens is we will vasodilate the brain to get blood flowing to the brain, increase blood delivery, and will vasoconstrict to most of the organs. Now we'll increase blood. We'll increase blood pressure here. Not necessarily blood flow, but blood pressure here, and things like that. So let me fix that so I'm a little bit more clear on what I was trying to say. I don't want you guys to get confused on that. It will increase some blood flow, but when you increase that, you're going to increase fluid delivery to the tissues, but not necessarily increase oxygen delivery. And if I just say blood pressure, that will overall cover it and be a little bit more accurate. Okay, so, and I felt like that's something I needed to do. So, that's a big deal. All right, now, so here you can see your vagus nerve goes into the heart to lower the blood pressure. Sympathetic nervous system raises the blood pressure. We use our cardiac control centers of the medulla oblongata to control the heart rate parasympathetically and sympathetically using your cardiac plexus, using your vagus and things like that. Okay? Now, so the baroreceptor reflex, remember, anytime your blood pressure goes up, you are actually increasing their stimulation. What am I talking about here? When I do that, just so you understand what I mean, this is what I'm drawing, is you're stretching the baroreceptors more, you're opening them up. And when you open them up, what you're going to do is increase the sodium entry into that cell, which causes depolarization of that cell. It depolarizes, and that then equals an increased action potential on these neurons. So then that neuron will start to fire more of those action potentials we drew. And I'm just going to draw a very crude action potential graph, not the graph that looked like that I've drawn before, but you just increase the action potentials, telling the brain there was an increase in blood pressure, and parasympathetic comes in and undoes it. Okay. And when it's dropping, sympathetic comes in to vasoconstrict and increase cardiac output. Okay. Now, KemaSceptre, this is stimulating by increased CO2, decreasing the pH, or the lowering of oxygen. Those are all the same thing. Again, if you understand what I was sketching here, this is all the same kind of thing here on that. So if we understand this, then you understand that chemically what's going on. And this is your KemaSceptre reflex. Okay? KemaSceptre. This is baroreceptor. Baroreceptor. Okay, so those are two very important things that you guys should be paying very important attention to for this exam. Okay? Alright, so a big deal there. Baroreceptor versus KemaSceptre reflex. So if you didn't understand the biochemistry of the cell stuff and say respiration, then it's harder to get this. Now, there's other things that also control our blood pressure, things like hormones, the endocrine system. Epinephrine increases cardiac output. How? Increases blood pressure. ADH, it retains fluid, which increases volume, which increases pressure. EPO, it makes your red blood cells be produced. It increases red blood cell production. When you do this, the blood gets thicker, increases viscosity. When the blood gets thicker, remember, viscosity increases, blood pressure increases. That was last lecture. Angiotensin II, which we're going to talk about more in a minute, is a vasoconstrictor. Vasoconstriction increases resistance, which increases pressure. Natriuretic peptide, it causes you to pee sodium. You excrete sodium. If it's pulled out of the blood, when sodium pulls fluid into the blood, which increases pressure by peeing it out, you reduce the blood volume and decrease the pressure. So I want you to understand that basically what happens, and let me kind of sketch that a little bit again. I know I've done this in the past already, but when I have a blood vessel here, and this blood vessel has lots of sodium cation in it, these sodium cations are hydrophilic. And one of the things I always tell my students is osmosis. It's a real hoot. Water always moves towards the greater solute. So this means this thing here, these hydrophilic substances, means it's high solute, which means it's hypertonic. Water moves towards hypertonic environment, and that will cause an increase in water, making the water push out against the blood vessel wall, and that causes a dramatic increase in blood pressure, if this makes sense. Okay? Okay. Now, and I really hope that makes sense. Now, that's what natriuretic peptide does, is undoes what I just drew. Epinephrine, norepinephrine increases your heart rate, increases cardiac output. Cardiac output is stroke volume times heart rate, or heart rate times stroke volume. The order of operation does not matter when you are multiplying or adding. It only matters when you divide or subtract. ADH is released when your blood volume goes down. If you have lost blood due to blood loss, due to bleeding, or you become dehydrated, that also means your blood is too concentrated. When you're dehydrated, we conserve it and we increase blood volume. EPO, when the kidneys, when you have low pressure, low oxygen levels, we might want to increase red blood cell production. When we're anemic or hypoxic. When blood pressure is low, blood pressure is low, let me add that, RBC count is low, or oxygen levels decrease. And let me just kind of highlight that real quick so that you guys have that and it's fixed. I'm always finding little typos because I type my notes and I have no editors and I had to make a lot of notes. Now, another thing you have to really understand is the RAS system. RAS. This is huge, and this is hugely important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by explaining it and talk about it. And I'm going to start off with two major players, liver and kidneys. Now, the liver, we already said liver makes most of blood proteins. One of the proteins the liver makes that's going to be found in the blood is a protein called angiotensinogen. I want you to underline gen. Why? If it's got gen at the end, it's got to be activated or turned on. And you're going to be like, well, how am I going to activate it or turn it on? Well, we're going to see. Now, kidneys, what kidneys are going to do, there's going to be a stimulus. there is going to be a stimulus here. There is going to be some change in the body. What is it? Well, it could be that the low levels of sodium, high levels of potassium, or a decrease in blood pressure. These three things here will go and stimulate kidney to release an enzyme called renin. Renin is an enzyme, and I'm going to do that. Now, what I want to do with renin is I'm going to draw a pair of scissors. You're like, why is he drawing scissors? It's like scissors, okay? Why is renin like scissors? Well, angiotensinogen is going to come in and react. It's going to come to the scissors. What happens is, think of angiotensinogens like this, okay? Let's use some let's say we have angiotensin here. I need to make that a little bit bigger. Sorry. Let's mark that out. Let's make that a little bit bigger so I can see it. Okay. Let's say I have angiotensin, and here I have ogen. Okay, now, it's like a pair of scissors. Why? What's going to happen? Well, the scissors are going to come in and cut off the ogen. And cut off the ogen. Okay? And what that's going to make is angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1. So think about renins like scissors. It cuts the ogen off, and now it makes it active. Here, inactive gen. Here, active. Angiotensin 1 is active. Okay. Now, angiotensin 1, there's another enzyme here called ACE. Stands for angiotensin converting enzyme. ACE comes in and makes angiotensin 2. So it's just a little bit different. Okay? ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. Now you probably heard of ACE inhibitors. An ACE inhibitor inhibits ACE from turning angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 will go to a gland called the adrenal medulla and cause it to release aldosterone. Aldosterone. Now, what does aldosterone do? Aldosterone will do one thing, is it will retain sodium, excrete potassium, it will vasoconstrict, and cause the releases ADH as well. It stimulates ADH release. And all of this will ultimately increase sodium, increase blood pressure, and decrease potassium. This is body response. And notice here, the body response is opposite to the stimulus. So this is what kind of feedback? You got it, negative feedback. Okay, so what I want you guys to be able to do here, now ACE, let's go here with ACE and also draw a pair of scissors here. ACE is again like a pair of scissors, activating and clipping things. Okay, it activates and clips where this stuff goes. Now, why am I teaching this? You guys will give drugs called ACE inhibitors. You will give renin blockers. You will give aldosterone blockers. You will give angiotensin 1 or angiotensin 2 blockers. These are all drugs that regulate blood pressure, like lisinopril is an ACE inhibitor. It is the single most prescribed medication in America is lisinopril. Okay, so what you're going to see is this mechanism, this pathway here. I want to help you guys understand it by drawing this out. Okay, we have to help you understand it. This is huge. You're going to see this in patho. You're going to see this in pharm, especially pharmacology. You have to understand it, okay? So if you can draw this out and understand it. Now, there's a few things I want to mention here real quick. Now, one of the interesting things is that I'm just going to mention, this is for later on when you guys are in healthcare. This reaction here, ACE, happens in the lungs. What is one of the single most common lisinopril or ACE inhibitor side effects? Is the side effect, you will see, is a cough. Okay, that cough. This is why is this chemical reaction actually happens in the lining of the lung, starts to irritate it, and you'll get this persistent cough. That is actually why. Okay. Now, not on exam here. Okay, that's just something I want to mention. I want to throw a clinical nugget in and help you understand. There's reasons you learn this. You're seeing it because you will need it, will use it. This is not about giving you less to make it easier. It's about giving you what you need so you can be successful in your programs. And guys, I have done this for a long time now, and I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm talking about. Alright, now, so as you can see, not much left. The hard part's really kind of done. Now, as we see, atrial natriuretic peptide is the opposite of aldosterone. It actually causes you to pee sodium. It actually makes you lose more water. So it's actually also opposite of ADH. It also reduces thirst. So it blocks ADH. It blocks aldosterone. It even blocks your epinephrine, norepinephrine, and it's a vasodilator. Natriuretic peptide is the opposite of this stuff up here. Now, atrial natriuretic peptide, your right atrium makes it because it's stretching during your diastole because of increased venous return. That stretches the atria, the atrial wall stretches, that distension stimulates the release of a hormone into the blood. Now, what is perfusion? Perfusion is autoregulation of blood flow to tissues. Tissues at the local level, autoregulation, where it happens within a system, helps to keep blood flow going to your tissues. So, if you're in homeostasis and cardiac output is stable, all you need to do is regulate resistance at your local arterioles. And when homeostasis is lost, vasodilators can accelerate blood flow because there's not enough oxygen or too much CO2. And that means you are needing more blood flow to tissues, especially the brain. There's too much lactic acid, which means the body's not getting enough oxygen. Nitrous oxide release, that causes dilation. That actually is a cause of erections. A male's penis become erect due to vasodilation as a result of nitrous oxide. There is actually too much potassium or hydrogen ions, and that can actually cause some issues going on because potassium can actually go up, and it can cause excess repolarization of muscle cells. Histamine and even increase temperatures. Temperatures can do that too. Now, vasoconstrictors, prostaglandins from a platelet to help you form a blood clot. Your endothelians, they're vasoconstrictors, and ADH is a vasoconstrictor. Okay, so here's some things that we can add to that are all vasodilators. Okay, now when you are, like I said, around 5,600 milliliters a minute, 5.6 liters, is a normal cardiac output. When you lightly exercise, we want to get more vasodilation to the muscles occurs to get more oxygen for light exercise, so the muscles can get more oxygen and make more ATP to be able to match and meet muscle contraction. So resistance drops, blood flow through those capillaries goes up, blood flow in veins go up, and when the blood flow to those veins go up, blood flow to the right atrium goes up. Venous return increases because veins are getting more blood, and that means more blood gets back to the superior and inferior vena cava, which more blood gets into the right atrium. That also means breathing rate goes up, so cardiac output goes up, and we increase because the venous return is increasing cardiac output. More blood in, more blood out. That is a big thing. Remember, cardiac output increases as a factor of increased venous return. That is Frank Starling principle. And there is a statement I just made there that is a great test question. Hugely important. Okay, now, if you're heavily exercising, you're going to pull blood away from any organ you don't need, except for muscles, keep your muscles going. So you're going to reduce blood flow to muscles you're not using, just muscles you need. You're going to shunt blood away from things you don't need. But this reduces cholesterol and reduces your risk of heart attack over a long term. So heavy exercise will reduce cholesterol, will reduce your low density lipoprotein, which is the bad cholesterol, things like that. Now, if you're hemorrhaging, you must restrict blood loss and keep your blood volume up. So what happens is your blood loss affects stroke volume. There's not as much blood in the body, so you to maintain a cardiac output of 5,600 milliliters a minute or 5.6 liters a minute, your heart rate goes up. Okay? So if I want to keep it 5,600 milliliters a minute and my stroke volume is going down, heart rate must go up. Because if I lose blood and blood loss reduces stroke volume, then you must make the heart rate go up to keep the cardiac output the same. That's what I'm trying to say here, okay? I'm going to edit this in a minute as soon as I'm done. So that's basically what you're doing. If you're bleeding, your heart rate goes up. Try to keep that going. Now, the other thing is, if blood pressure goes down, what we immediately want to do is increase cardiac output. We increase the cardiac output, we make the heart rate go up, and we constrict our blood vessels. Sympathetic nervous system is what does that. It constricts the arterioles, increases blood pressure. That increases venous return, makes the heart rate go up. Also, with that, sympathetic release of epinephrine or epinephrine increases the heart rate and contractility, actually, and vasoconstriction, blood pressure goes up. So when your blood pressure drops down, we use the sympathetic nervous system to increase heart rate and increase constriction. Over long term, we're about restoring long term to decrease blood pressure. We're going to keep blood volume up. Now, we know how we do a short-term loss of blood pressure and make it go up. Short-term loss, decrease blood pressure. But long-term loss of blood pressure is because we've lost blood somehow. Let me get this deleted and that and fix that. It's bugging me, and I'm sorry that I do this during the middle of the lecture. But if I don't do it now, it won't get done, and I'm sorry. Okay. So, what happens is we want to reduce capillary hydrostatic pressures. There is now more volume that's coming from the interstitial fluid, and blood volume goes up. So aldosterone and ADH are going to help to also get that blood volume up. So we reduce capillary pressure. That gets some fluids. We're actually stealing fluids from that. Now this is important. You need to know how fluids move from one fluid compartment to another. This is an important thing in healthcare. That's why I'm talking about this. Okay? It is important. So then our aldosterone retains the sodium ions and the blood osmolarity goes up, and ADH also retains fluid, and those fluids follow the salts to get more blood fluids into the blood. Blood volume goes up. We get more thirsty. We reclaim more water from the gut. We drink more water, and then we also increase blood volume. Then the blood loss, we want to replenish the amount of blood cells that we've lost. We want to replace blood cells we've lost due to bleeding. So our EPO increases our red blood cell production. Then that gets more blood cells, which is increasing the blood volume essentially, but making blood more viscous, increasing blood pressure. But it's getting the blood's composition back. Okay? Now the next thing, I will ask you guys about shock. I'm going to ask you guys what shock is. Shock is short-term, acute, circulatory distress. What happens? If my blood pressure lowers or excessive blood loss or blood flow, one might say excessive blood flow or blood loss, then I'm going to add here just because that I wanted that in there. And I'm going to do it here. Is you're going to be, this causes the cardiac output to go down. Shock causes a release of reduction of cardiac output. Heart could be damaged, caused by, let me pause for a second. I want to fix this. Damage of the heart. What could that be? Let's say I've got an infection of the heart that causes damage, like endocarditis, or endocardium got attacked, or pericarditis, or pericardium got attacked. External pressures on the heart. Let's say that I'm in a car wreck and a steering wheel slams into my chest and it causes injury. That can actually increase pressure of the heart.